The General Grand Council of Cryptic Masons International welcomes you to the following presentation.
Well, thank you, most puissant Grand Master and brethren all. It's a real honor for me to be here. It's good to see that there's a few Oklahoma companions that have signed on just to kind of keep me in check, but it gives me a sense of comfort to see them here. So I thank my Oklahoma brothers for signing on. I'm going to give a kind of a formal talk this afternoon, since you are recording this, and since I always think that these forums are designed for us to think about some things and learn about some things, and so I decided that what I was going to talk about today is the hero's quest for the secrets of the Cryptic Rite. And it is universally agreed that the ritual ceremonies of Freemasonry represent the mythic model of the hero's journey. It defines a series of stages along the path to personal change and growth, and we all know that. And it begins with a call to adventure, a challenge to do something different, change our ways, find out what has meaning to our life, indeed, what the real meaning is in our life. And by crossing the threshold of the sacred space of a Masonic lodge, we accept the call or the need to change. Now, we don't realize it in the moment that this is our entry into a world between worlds. And there will be a lot of thresholds that we must then overcome to answer the call. There's a lot of work required on ourselves to change. There are a lot of new discoveries to be made in the process of our own awakening. And the work we are referring to is inner work. And we get through it by accepting the fact that we all need some help to make this kind of inner change in our life. We acknowledge that we don't know everything after all. We need the guidance of others who have gone the way before us. And you see, it is the community of men who must ultimately entice our hero to follow the journey to self-improvement and meaning, because to be a man, we must be affirmed into the community of men. We simply cannot overemphasize the significance of male association when it comes to discovering and molding the mature masculine soul. And so the need for fraternalism is and always will be the number one psychological need in men. Now, the fundamental thing we need to know about the hero's journey is that it is always meant to change us or transform us in some significant way. It moves us from one point in our life to another. And the hero's journey always begins with the call to the experience of initiation. And of course, we all experience a lot of initiations in our life. In a real sense, we never quit being initiated. And some obvious examples every man can relate to might include getting a driver's license, leaving home after high school, getting married, getting our first job after college, having our first child, the death of our parents. And all of these events change us in some extraordinary way. We are never the same after we experience all of them. And the reason we are changed by these experiences is that every one of them awaken our consciousness. Each of them move us to a higher state of being. So when a candidate knocks on the door of a Masonic lodge, he is standing at the threshold of his own consciousness. And beyond that door, he should find a temple of enlightenment. And everything he does therein, every symbol he encounters, every pause he takes, Every process he witnesses through the degrees of Masonry from that point forward relates to his increased awareness, his levels of consciousness, and his transformation as a more enlightened human and spiritual being. The late brother Kirk McNulty perhaps defined it best in his wonderful book, The Way of the Craftsman, that the craft communicates two notions. First, that mankind is made in the image of God, and second, that each of us reflects the structure of the universe. And this correspondence between the universe and man, between God and man, is the basis of all Masonic instruction. It is in such private and magical conclaves that each of us is introduced to our own path to self-improvement. And what we make of this experience becomes our rite of passage. It determines the difference we will make in ourselves, in others, and in the world. And we cannot begin to understand our own fraternal history without understanding manhood. Until only very recently, across the entire span of history, manhood has been at the center of life and progress. Men have always held to the notion that the future depends on them, that deep within their own receptacles of manhood, there rests an inherent ability to sire or mentor great men who will become the heroes of sons yet unborn. And as men, it is our quiet longing that even our own sons might become, or at least associate with such heroes. But, as you know, we no longer live in a man's world. Gender roles have become increasingly difficult to define. We are no longer formed in distinct molds. Manhood is constantly under siege today from feminists, religious zealots, political and gender stereotyping, spousal independence, ethnic diversity, political correctness, media and movie male bashing, interest-driven legislative and court decisions, and the regrettable but often publicized inappropriate behavior of the worst examples of manliness among us. And the result is that the meaning of manhood must now be sought out and determined by each man in his own experience. So regardless of the stresses we must endure, the fact remains is we are still men. And consequently, it is more important than ever that we be about the consciously understanding our roles as men and taking responsibility for our actions in the world. No matter how stubborn the challenge, we know that how we play out our role as men in our own time will largely determine the kind and quality of life that succeeding generations will have. Freemasonry is an organization that instructs men how to be in control of their lives in conscious and responsible ways. It was created to mold men into icons of virtue and morality, to fashion them in healthy and positive ways so that their very actions will exhibit virtue and moral integrity in the larger culture of men. In a very real sense, Freemasonry's traditional role in this journey to mature masculinity is now more important than ever. We live in a time where adolescent boys no longer have a grounded and effective passage to manhood, where young men in adulthood are still not sure why they are men, are not sure that they are men. The traditional rites of passage from boyhood to manhood, which have always been a key for survival in human history, has been absent. In fact, our modern society has largely eliminated them. We live in a culture where young men no longer know the rites of passage, how one gets to be a man, and what being a man is supposed to look like. And the central problem for the male transition to manhood is that there are no formal rites through which young people can express the yearnings of their soul that will usher them from childhood to manhood. And in our contemporary American experience, we no longer honor the inner journey of the wisdom quest like our indigenous ancestors, or help young men cultivate the wisdom of their dreams as did the ancient Greeks. There's no one entity in their young life, or no one entity in their young life has taken on the responsibility of intentionally establishing the essential marks of passage from one social role to another. As a result, by the time our young men leave adolescence, they've lost touch with themselves. They approach the world of adulthood with a soul that has been undernourished. Yet what matters to each man's soul is authenticity. A man must know, is this me, my path, my life, or am I acting out someone else's dream for me? When there are no perceived guideposts, or when some culturally accepted norm for transmission involving intergenerational males is not in place and has not in place over multiple generations, how does a guy know if he's made it or not? What does he use as a test of validation? I can assure you, my brothers, that a male who is privately uncertain of his manhood will also be uncertain in his behavior. In Freemasonry, the reason we provide a rite of initiation is that it puts closure on the process of becoming a man. The Masonic experience serves as both a safe meeting place and a healthy means of communication for men. Our membership gives us a sense of belonging and identity as social creatures. Our ritual cements our commitment to the fraternity. Our experience of ritual provides instruction in the images, allegories, and myths that touch upon the archetypes of manhood and communicate our shared values, principles, and ideals. Our instruction addresses our higher emotional and intellectual needs and transcends the whole range of human experience and expression. It is holistic and experiential, which means that we experience through our human senses, and our mind is engaged in forming concrete memories and connections with the images, words, symbols, and ideas being communicated. To carry these principles of instruction into our broader lives is to live as if life is kind of a ritual itself in which everything has the potential to communicate something of deep significance. And finally, our initiatory experience distinguishes us from the rest of the community and marks our consequence among Masons. It is our rite of passage. It is the turning point in the psychological development of a brother's life. It is the art of facilitating development, maturity, and transformation in the ways of men in each of us. Freemasonry's greatest purpose is to assist men in transforming their psyches and relationships into wiser, stronger, and more beautiful reflections of the great architect's design for the human soul and society. And my brothers, this is the landscape of a well-constructed and fulfilled life. Now, I've provided all of this prefatory information to lead me to this point. There must be an initiation for any of these kinds of eventualities to occur. Initiation is that moment between from whence we came and whither we are going. As a member of our tradition, the only thing that each of us can do is aid, support, or facilitate the work to be accomplished. But the transformation of the initiate can only be realized gradually within himself as he passes stage by stage through the different degrees offered him, knowing that his success in the journey will ultimately lead him to his inner identity with the divine. Our role as exemplars to our brothers and the instruction of our rituals is to lead him to the inner nature of his very being. And we call this aspect of the journey the secret tradition. It begins in the middle chamber of the Fellowcraft degree, and it ends in the secret master degree of the Cryptic Rite. The degrees from the Master Mason to the Secret Master represent a journey inward into the caverns of one's consciousness to discover the highest nature of his being. Now, without revealing how the path is taken within the rubric of our rituals, I will say that every man is engaged in the labor of building his own spiritual temple. The work of gaining divine knowledge is labor of the earth. And the secret chambers within which this work is carried out informs him that no man can ever know all truth while he makes his earthly sojourn, regardless of the path of faith and reason he takes. And even when he knows where to look for truth, he can only receive a substitute or a portion of it during his earthly life. He must come to the divine master to receive his reward. His earthly labor cannot be consummated except by the acquisition of divine truth, and such a reward always remains partially covered in this life, for the temple he is building is the temple of this life, in the hope that the foundations of the life he is now building, it will become the temple of a future life. In our first temple or life, the truth cannot be found. We must be content with its substitute. But we also realize that we have at least the potential of becoming a suitable substitute for divine truth. There is present a holy of holies within each of us. And no matter how weak we may become or how often we err, the Spirit of God is not far away from our conscious mind. When we unite with the highest aspects of our being, that is our sacred life, through spiritual thought, study, and insight, we begin to confirm to the idea of the divine will, corresponding to perfect thought, perfect action, and perfect behavior. Such is the tradition, the transition from the profane to the initiate to the divine being. We come and we ask. We seek the truth and we find it. We knock and the door is opened unto us. Now, the secret tradition of Freemasonry is highlighted in the Select Master degree of the Cryptic Rite. The historical object of the degree is to commemorate the deposit of an important secret or treasure within a secret vault located between the Second Temple. So secret, in fact, that even the workmen engaged in the building did their secret work without ever being openly recognized as a separate group of workers. Their job and their existence were unknown. Now, the esoteric meaning here is that secret masters work in secrecy and silence that they may prepare and preserve the sacred deposits of truth until such time as these may be revealed or come into full revelation. From the perspective of faith, the idea is that the work which men do now is not for the present alone. Their labors should be such that when their work in the present life is finished, the grand architect will reward them in the second temple of eternal life. Now, the essential teaching has to do with the path one must take to earn such a reward. And that takes us to the secret vault tradition in Freemasonry. We make numerous references to the mystic center or secret chamber in Freemasonry. We first encounter it in the Fellowcraft degree with our journey to the middle chamber, but we are not told what we are there to find. In the Master Mason degree, we are searching for the lost secrets, and we know they are to be found in the Sanctum Sanctorum or a sacred center, but again, we can't find the center because we're not told where to look. Yet the center of which we speak is the same place for both the Fellowcraft and the Master Mason. In craft masonry, this center is presumed to be the point within the circle. And it is the same center by means of which we hope to find the vault and its precious content in the chapter and council degrees of the York Rite. It is the same center in which is a sacred treasure is revealed in the Royal Arch or the Holy of Holies or center of consecrated sacredness. But it remains unknown because it is an ineffable idea. The journey to divine truth never ends, for it is the journey of the rebirth of the human race, the self-revelation of God. Thus, in all of Masonry, it is the passage or journey that must have the most meaning to us. It is the circumambulations in the lodge, the passage of the winding stairs, the journey to the middle chamber, the journey through the 9 arches, where each arch or cavern contains the attributes of God which must integrate into our own soul. Thus, in the cryptic degrees, the vault symbolizes the human in search for the essential reality and attributes of God. The Mason, like the select master, accesses the knowledge of the divine truth only by seeking ever deeper within his inmost self, his soul. It is the divine tool given to man's nature for the purpose of God realization. In Masonry, all such symbolism refers to a divine level of consciousness. My brothers, the journey for every man is both a descent and an ascent at the same time. We must descend into the center of our own being in order to discover that divine spirit within us, wherein we will behold God in the mirror of existence. And there will be then, as there was in the beginning, only God. So that's my formal presentation for the General Grand Council to consider today.